Hello and welcome to this training video brought to you by the COVID-19 Fiscal Team. During this video, we will review supporting documentation for invoices. We will provide an overview of why it's important, and then we will dive into the various categories. Along the way, we'll show you some examples. Now let's review some basics about supporting documentation. What is supporting documentation for an invoice? It's simply evidence to support that the goods or services that were supposed to be delivered were. Why is it needed? When submitted with an invoice, it can help expedite processing, so there isn't a back and forth of asking for more information, which can add time. It is also important for record keeping and audit purposes. When is it needed? Anytime an invoice is processed, supporting documentation may be required. Speaking of the different types, let's go over the categories that are within an invoice that have different types of supporting documentation. There's personal services, supplies and operating, travel, contractual, indirect, and other. In order to assist with capturing what could be used as supporting documentation for each of these categories, an invoice documentation checklist has been created in addition to this video. It can be found on the COVID-19 Fiscal Headquarters website. The supporting documentation for personal services such as salaries, wages, and benefits must be based on records that accurately reflect the work performed, encompass all activities compensated, comply with the established accounting policies and practices of the entity, and support the distribution of the employee's salary or wages among specific activities. Some examples of this are timesheets, detailed pay stubs, or the entity's documented personnel and accounting policies. Now let's go over another part of personal services, fringe benefits. These are employer-paid portions of the additional benefits or allowances provided by employers to their employees as compensation in addition to regular salaries and wages. These include but are not limited to the cost of leave, employee insurance, pensions, or unemployment benefit plans. Some examples of this are the documented methodology for determining charges of the fringe rate charged, or the entity's documented fringe policy. Supplies and operating expenses can vary from simple office supplies to hosting a conference or a training. There are various examples of documentation around this category, such as itemized receipts or invoices, the purchasing policy of the entity. If it's a meeting or a training, include items such as the agenda, meeting minutes, sign-in sheets, or venue agreements. It is important to note that food and beverage expenses for staff meetings or individual project staff are unallowable. Travel may be necessary to support the program fully. You may need to go to supervise a testing site or attend a meeting with partners on the other side of your region. In order to process an invoice for this, specific items to document it may be needed. These could include your entity's travel policy, fleet travel logs, fuel expenses, or sometimes the county fleet invoices. Or a travel expense form, which has all of the details, such as why you went, where you went, receipts, and maps. Contractual payments may occur when a service or good needs to be outsourced to a different entity. An example of this could be having a porta potty service provide enough facilities and cleaning services needed at a testing site, or contracting with a community organization to provide outreach and education services. To process an invoice like this, certain documents may be needed, such as detailed subcontractor invoices, receipts for expenses, MOUs or executed agreements, such as dates of engagement, subrecipient or contractor determination, scope of work, budget or deliverables, or the entity's documented policy for subrecipient subcontract monitorings for expenses. If your entity has a negotiated indirect rate through a federal government agency, that approved indirect cost rate must be on file with the CDPHE Internal Audit Unit. If you do not receive funds directly from a federal agency, CDPHE Internal Audit Unit will negotiate a rate with your entity. CDPHE only negotiates and approves submitted indirect cost proposals with organizations that receive funds directly from CDPHE. CDPHE requires all indirect rates to comply with general accepted accounting principles and be fully supported by actual cost data. If you elect to use the de minimis direct cost rate, costs may be consistently charged as either direct or indirect, but may not be doubly charged or inconsistently charged as both. If chosen, this methodology, once elected, must be used consistently for all federal awards until such time as a non-federal entity chooses to negotiate a rate with a non-federal entity may apply to new at any time. If using this rate, 10% of modified total direct cost documentation may be requested to support the rate claimed. It is only available to organizations that have never used a negotiated indirect cost rate. There may be other costs that don't fall under the previous categories. These could be documented with the entity's policies, itemized invoices or receipts, and if the expense is allocated to more than one project, the entity's documented allocation methodology. If a cost benefits two or more projects or activities in proportions that can be determined without undue effort or cost, the cost may be allocated to the projects based on the proportional benefit. Direct costs must be allocated based on a line-by-line or bottom-line allocation. Line-by-line relies on actual rate of usage of each cost, for example, rent expense based on square footage used by each program, or the phone numbers of phones using each programs. We've covered a lot in this training video. The main takeaway is that documentation is important no matter what kind of invoice you're submitting, whether it be for a week-long testing site or a printer. There are also some main themes on what is useful when it comes to the different types of documentation. Capture documented policies and agreements. Always get a detailed receipt or an invoice, and provide a justification of why the goods or services were purchased. This can include the thought process on how the decision was made to purchase. Essentially, why did you do what you did? If you remember those main points, it should help you determine what is needed based on your specific situation. That's it for this training video on supporting documentation. We hope it's useful to you the next time that you're filling out an invoice. Thank you for watching and all of your hard work.